All right, so let's talk about the simplex method. So instead of graphing, George Danzig came up with the simplex method to solve problems that are 3, 4, 5 variables. So now we could have x1, x2, x3, x4, x5 less than or equal to 100. You know, we're not limited to just x and y. But notice how a max will look. You're going to have your z, and we're going to use z for max. We're going to use x1s and x2s and x3s and x4s and so forth. Our inequalities have x1s and x2s, and notice these are all less than. Okay, so in a max problem, these have to be less than or equal to. Okay, now the ones that shall never be forgotten, that just says your variables are positive. So that's okay to have x1 greater than or equal to, and x2 greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so first thing we do is we are going to rewrite these, and we're going to rewrite them as equations, but we're going to leave space. So we're going to have, I might just come down here. So we're going to have x4x1 plus x2, leave a space, and then put equals 25 instead of the inequality. Then I'm going to write 2x1 plus 3x2, leave a big gap, equals 15. The x1 and x2 greater than or equal to 0 just mean they're positive. We worry about that when we do our pivots. Then at the top, you take your z, and the 3x1 that's on the right, you are going to bring it to the left side. And the way we do that is we subtract it from both sides. So I'm going to subtract 3x1, or use a negative 3x1. To get rid of the positive 5x2, I'm going to subtract that, both sides. And when everything cancels, the only thing that's left on the right is a 0. So my objective row is what we call that when you mess around with the z. So I get a negative 3x1, negative 5x2, and I'm going to write this below those other equations I just wrote. So negative 3x1, negative 5x2. The z is still positive because I never moved it, equals 0. Okay. And then what George Danzig did is he added his slacks. If you have 2 inequalities, you need 2 slacks. If you have 5 inequalities, you need 5 slacks. So I am going to add slack 1 to the top, slack 2. And you'll notice you should get a diagonal made out of slack 1, slack 2, and your z. So when you make your matrix, you're going to have a diagonal of 1s with 0s. All right. Now let's turn this into a matrix. Top row is going to be 4, 1, 1. And then I'm going to I like to just write these leading ones. So I'm going to write 4, 1, 2, 3 underneath that, and negative 3, negative 5 underneath that. Then I'm going to come over quite a ways, draw my line, and put my totals. So 25, 15, 0. Then I'm going to make the diagonal of 1s that my slack and my z make. So I'm going to put a 1, a 1, and a 1. And if that 1 doesn't go all the way down to that bottom row, you know you're wrong. So I'm going to put 0s under the first one, a 0 above and below the second one, and 2 zeros above the last one. So again, you should see a diagonal of 1s with 0s above and below. And on this, I like to draw a line above that bottom row because that's your objective row. Okay. All right. How do you know where to pivot? You look for the most negative number in the bottom row. So in this case, the most negative number in the bottom row is a negative 5. Then you do your ratios. So you're going to take 25 in the total column divided by 1, and that's 25. You're going to take 15 in the total column divided by 3. So is that 15 divided by 3 is 5. And you decide where to pivot on the smallest ratio. So 5 is the smallest ratio. So I am going to put a box around, which one is it? The 3 gave us that ratio. So the 3 in that second row is our pivot. Now a pivot means to get a 0 above and a 0 below. So this is exactly what we did on the last test. So your pivot row is permanent. That's why I said that all the time last test. So I'm going to rewrite 2, 3. I'm going to put a box around that, 0, 1, 0, and then my 15. On scratch paper, I'm going to do math with 3. and with the row above or below to get things to cancel. And remember, if you're stuck, you can just multiply. So I'm going to look above. 3 times 1 is 3. So 3 and a negative 3 are going to equal 0. So on scratch paper, I already have a positive 3. I'm going to multiply the top row by negative 3 all the way across everything. And I'm going to do this on scratch paper. So a lot of times on scratch paper, what we would say is we're going to use row 1 and we're going to add it to row 2 to get a new row. But if you notice, we're really taking row 1 times a negative 3. So sometimes we say that. Okay, we're going to take row 1 times negative 3 and add it to row 2. All right, so what do I get when I take row 1 times a negative 3? I get negative 12, negative 3, negative 3, 0, 0, negative 75. So I'm going to write that down. Negative 12, negative 3, negative 3, 0, 0, negative 75. And I'm going to write row 2. We didn't need to multiply that because we like the 3. So I'm going to write 2, 3, 0, 1, 0, 15. And this is all on scratch paper. I'm going to add. Money debt, I owe 12, have 2, that's negative 10. These cancel, I get 0, negative 3, and 0, negative 3, 0, 1 is 1, 0, and 0. Negative 75 and 15 is at what? Negative 60. All right. Now, the negative total is bad because remember we said those that shall not be forgotten, your x's and y's have to be positive, or your x1 and x2s have to be positive. You can't have negative eggs. So to fix it, you're going to go through and just multiply by negative 1. So it's going to become positive, positive, negative, 0, and then positive. Okay, because I multiplied through by negative 1. This is my new, well, if you're like, where does it go? Well, row 2 is permanent. This is your new row 1. So this is new row 1. So I'm going to write it in there. So row 1 is now 10, 0, positive 3, negative 1, 0, and 60. All right, let's do our next pivot. Our next pivot is row 2 with row 3. So I'm going to write row 2 and row 3. Now, again, if you're stuck and you're like, I don't know what to do, well, 3 and a negative 5, multiply them, that is 15 or negative 15. So that's what's going to cancel, is 15 and a negative 15. So to get a positive 15, I'm going to multiply the top, or my pivot row by 5, which is really my middle row here. So times 5, everything that's in that row, I'm going to multiply by 5. The bottom row doesn't need a negative because it already is negative. So I'm just going to multiply the bottom row by 3 to get that negative 15 because I already have the negative part of it. All right, so on scratch paper, row 2 is going to be what? 10, 15, 0, 5, 0, 75. So I'm going to write that down. So I have 10, 15, 0, 5, 0, and I think that's 75 if I can do mental math. All right, and then on the bottom row, I get negative 9, negative 15, 0, 0, 3, 0. So I'm going to write that down. Negative 9, negative 15, 0, 0, 3, 0. So I get 1, 0, 0, 5, 3, and 75. That is my new row what? Well, your pivot row is permanent, so that must be my new row 3. So I'm going to write that down. 1, 0, 0, 5, 3, 75. All right. Now, we would start the process over again. That is one pivot because you have your number with zeros above and below. All right, look at your bottom row. Well, if you look at your bottom row, you have no negatives. Yay, because you decide where to pivot based on the most negative number. You don't have any negative numbers. So this means you are done, okay? You don't have to do another pivot. So at this point, how do you read off your answers? Because you know you're done. All right. So I'm going to label what the top is. My first variable was x1, that column. Column 2 was x2. Column 3 was slack 1. The next column, slack 2. Second to last column was z, and my very last is my total column. All right. So remember, we have basic and non-basic. Basic means it's easy. Like you have one number with a bunch of zeros. It's basic. Non-basic means it's complicated. There's a lot of stuff in there. So if you look under X1, you have a lot of numbers under there. That is not a basic variable, non-basic. So we call it, we're just going to set it equals 0. X2 has all zeros with one number. That is very basic. So that's a basic variable. So what you do is you take the total 15 divided by the 3 that is there. 15 divided by 3 is an answer of 5. Slack 1 is basic. It has a 3 and everything else is a 0. So go to the total column. 60 divided by 3 is 20. The answer for that. Slack 2 is ugly, okay, very complicated. So we would say it's non-basic. So we set it equal to 0. The way you read your Z is in this last little corner. So 3Z equals 75. So you have to divide both sides by 3. So 75 divided by 3 is 25. Okay. And again, if this was a real life story problem, it might say, well, you should raise 0 guinea pigs, 5 chickens. You're going to have 20 pounds of, I don't know, grain left over. You're going to use all of, I don't know, the grass that you have, and you're going to maximize profit at $25, something like that. Okay. All right, let's look at, I'm going to stop this here, and then we're going to look at that canoe story problem we did the other day, because every once in a while, this one only had 1 pivot. We need to do one that has 2. And also you need to realize that you can always read off an answer as you pivot. It just might not be the optimal solution. So it might be like on your corner point, it's an answer. It's just not the best answer. So we need to talk about that too. All right, I'm going to render this one, and then we'll look at that canoe kayak story problem that we did in a previous video or did in class, and we're going to tie it to this method now.